So once again, this is Darlito Bernard Gidalizo welcoming you back to the lecture series on the subject dispute resolution and crisis or incident management. And for this video, the lecture is focused on the nature and types of crisis or disasters. So at the end of this lesson, the viewers or the learners are expected to be able to classify the different types of crisis according to the nature. Because when you say types of crisis, you can typify them or you can classify them in so many ways. And for this particular lecture, we are going to take on the we call it the types of crisis according to what causes them or according to the nature of those crises. So before moving on to our topic, once again, let's take a look on what does the Bible say about disasters. The Lord Jesus Christ said in Mark chapter 13, verse 7 to 8, that when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. So sabi niya, huwag kayong maalarma kung meron kayong marinig na gera or meron kayong mga nabalitaan na nagigera. So sabi niya, do not be alarmed. Una, maaring ito ay tinatawag natin realidad na mangyayari. At maaari, sinasabi niya na do not be alarmed because andito naman ako na protection ninyo. So possibly ganon. And then he said further that this must take place. Kailangan mangyari mo ito, pero hindi pa katapusan ng lahat. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of birth pains. So sinasabi niya na marami pang mangyayari na gera at mayroong mga natural disasters na mangyayari. Pero sabi niya, ito lamang ang pasimula ng lahat. In other words, the Lord Jesus Christ was giving us signs of the end of times. Pero hindi natin alam kung kailan nga talaga mangyayari ito. Tulad ng mga critical events, tulad ng mga crisis, tulad ng mga disasters, hindi natin alam kung kailan darating yan, ganun din ang ating Panginoon, di natin alam kung kailan darating yan. So while we are facing the reality of disasters, well, it is the most important thing to do is to believe in God and to have faith in Him through Jesus Christ upang nasa atin yung kanyang tinatawag natin protection. At the same time, be ready because we do not know when will the Lord will actually return upang kanyang ibigay ang final judgment sa mundong ito. Kaya maigi na tayo'y magkaroon ng sapat at tunay na pananampalataya sa kanya. Okay, let's now move on to our topic, the nature of crisis. Well, when we say nature of crisis, it is answering the question, what makes a crisis or what causes a crisis? A crisis or an event is considered to be a critical event or a crisis event if that is unexpected and there is a high uncertainty as to the effect of this particular event, and there may be a cascading dynamics, meaning it may cause a major disturbance or a major disruption on the operation of a certain organization or institution. Or further, it is considered a crisis event because of the limited time to act on it. Meaning, wala ka ng oras para ma-prevent ito or ma-reduce yung impact nito. So those are the things that makes an event a crisis or a critical event. And further, from the institutional point of view, quite different challenges are encountered than those normally addressed by the Global Environmental Governance Research Committee. Well, those challenges faced by companies or institutions under crisis are different from those challenges that are encountered by the international community in fight against global or international crisis that we have. And of course, tinatawag natin silang mga critical event or crisis events because there is a need for early warning. Meaning, kailangan na ma-detect ito. Otherwise, mag-cause ito ng malaking impact sa iyong organization or sa iyong buhay. Another thing, kaya siya nagiging crisis events because hindi kaya ito na isolve ng isang level or isang tao. Just like say for example, ang isang problema na darating sa isang company, hindi yan probably makonsider na isang crisis kung kaya pang isolve yan ng isang tao lamang. Pero kapag kailangan na ng multi-level network responses, then yan ay considered na critical event. Just like the pandemic that we have, hindi ito kaya ng government lang natin. Kailangan ng multi-level response. Okay, mula doon sa regional offices down to the barangay, and hindi lamang yon, kailangan ito ng tinatawag natin teamwork with the private organizations. Okay? So another thing, kaya siya nagiging crisis ang isang event dahil kalimitan kailangan ito ng modifications, ng improvisations to further face or solve that particular critical event. Further, crises force us to reconsider the way we look at communication technologies in global environmental governance. So what is global environmental governance? So this is the sum of organizations, policy instruments, financing mechanisms, rules, procedures, and norms that regulate the processes of global environmental protection. So these are the things that being done by the United Nations or any other international organizations of countries, say for example the Southeast Asian countries or the ASEAN countries, and of course the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and other organizations in the world, in which they are looking at the we call it events that are happening today that may affect the international relationship, or at least the global environment. Say for example the global warming that we have today. So somehow, whether we like it or not, the threat of the global warming somehow force the countries or every nation to reconsider their perspective on the technologies that we have, on the policies that we have today. So even the pandemic that we have, somehow it changes the perception. It changes everything. All countries are affected by this thing, so it can be considered as part of the global environmental governance. So the pandemic is not only a problem of a certain country or one country, but actually a problem of all countries in the world today. So moving on, again, what is crisis? Crisis refers to the sudden unplanned events which cause major disturbances. So ito yung sinasabi natin kanina na cascading dynamics, meaning malaki yung effect niya doon sa isang organization or isang country or dito sa ating mundo in the organization, and trigger a feeling of fear and threat amongst the employees. So if we are talking of institutional crisis, then it will give anxiety or fear, and the employees are threatened that the company might close down, or it will be bankrupt later on and they will lose their employment. So moving on, what are the types of crisis according to the nature? If the crisis is caused by any disturbance in the environment nature, then they are called natural crisis. And basically, natural crises are beyond the control of human beings. We cannot stop them. We cannot stop the coming of a typhoon or a cyclone. We can stop the occurrence of a tornado or an earthquake. Okay, but the only thing that we can do now is to at least reduce the impact or the severity of the loss of lives and properties. So if the crisis is caused by a fight or by a friction, okay, between employees, then we call that confrontation crisis. And confrontation crisis will or it may result to non-productive acts like boycotts, strikes for indefinite periods, and so on. Or meaning, kapag may mga away among employees, ang mangyayari niyan ay mawawala yung proper coordination, mawawala yung productivity, or may mga iba biglang magfo-force leave sila kasi ayaw nilang magtrabaho dahil ayaw nilang makita yung kanilang mga kaaway doon sa opisina. And sometimes confrontation crisis may be caused by employees disobeying their superiors, by demanding ultimatums and force them to accept their demands. Okay? Kung hindi yan masolusyonan, then magkakaroon ng crisis doon sa company or sa institution. So moving on, if the crisis arises when management takes certain decisions knowing the harmful consequence of the same towards the stakeholders and external parties, then that is called crisis of organizational misdeeds. So pag sinabi mong misdeeds, pagkakamali. Alam na nga ng mga policymakers na mali itong mali yung kanilang gagawin at mayroong possibility na hindi magandang consequence ito, ay ginawa pa rin nila. Okay? In such cases, superiors ignore the after effects of strategies and implement the same for quick results. So, yun ang mangyayari. I-ignore pa rin nila. So, eventually, ito ay magkakaroon ng disturbances or magkakaroon ng disruption sa normalcy ng operation ng isang organization dahil sa maling decision or indiscretion ng mga policy makers. Now, if the crisis arises all of a sudden and on an extremely short notice, okay, so biglang inambus yung presidente or inambus yung manager, general manager ng company or yung owner ng company, okay, na walang warning. So managers do not get warning signals, and such a situation is in most cases beyond anyone's control. So you call that your sudden crisis. If the crisis is caused by neglecting minor issues in the beginning, okay, so take note, neglecting minor issues in the beginning. So may mga problema na nung pangsimula, pero ito ay inignore nila. Okay? So just like when you say smoldering, no? Smoldering is yung baga, yung ember. So kapag mayroong baga, mayroong ember, at hindi yan tinatawag natin pinatay ka agad or inignore yan, so maari na yung baga na yan, yung ember na yan, yun ang magkokos ng pagkasunog ng buong building. So same thing, pag sinabing smoldering crisis, yan ay nagsimula dahil pinabayaan yung isang maliit na problema. Okay? Say for example, yung problema ng empleyado na nagko-complain siya sa maliit na bagay na hindi binibigay yung kanyang yung mga benefits para sa kanya. So inignore yon, and then eventually umabot ng ilang taon na ini-ignore yon at eventually ay nakapag-isip-isip yung empleyado na yan na mag-file ng labor case against the company. So it may eventually cause the we call it mas malaki yung babayaran ng company doon sa empleyado na yan kasi marami ng mga damages na hingin yan. So managers often can foresee crisis, but they should not ignore the same and wait for someone else to take action and warn the employees immediately to avoid such a situation so that that crisis will not escalate into a massive crisis on their organization. On the other hand, if the crisis is caused by some notorious employees, okay, by trying to help criminal activities and extreme steps to fulfill their demands, then that is called crisis of malevolence. Okay, so ano nga ba ang malevolence? Pag sinabing malevolence, yan yung feeling of spite or hatred. Okay, so kapag yung mga empleyado ay galit sila sa kanilang company, so pwede silang makipag-connive sa mga criminals. Okay, pwede magkaroon ng inside job na tinatawag natin, just like sa mga bank robberies. So accordingly, ay more or less 80% of bank robberies are perpetrated by, we call it managers themselves, by conniving with organized crime groups. Dahil galit sila. Okay? So somehow, maaring ipakidnap nila yung company officials or they will resort to rumor mongerings. Okay? At later on, magkokos yan ng crisis kasi may galit sa mga empleyado. So kaya kapag sa PNP or sa military, normally mayroon tayong tinatawag na loyalty check ng mga commanders ng military or ng chief of staff or ng chief PNP para kung anuman mayroong mga dissatisfaction, may mga galit sa gobyerno or sa pamunan, at least ay maayos kaagad ito at masolusyonan kaagad ito. Okay, so that is the crisis of malevolence. So what about technological crisis? This is a result of failure in technology. Okay, so say for example, if your company is dependent on the technologies that we have, the computer technology, once na yan ay nag-breakdown, once na nakurap yung mga software, lahat, yan ay nahack. So, nag-focus yan ng technological crisis. Say for example, just like an individual person. So he is dependent much on his computer or on his gadgets kasi yun ang kanyang pinagkakakitaan. Once na yan ay nag-back down, once na yan ay nasira or nahack yung kanyang system, then kapag yung pagkahack or pagkasira ng kanyang technological gadgets ay malaki yung kanyang impact doon sa kanyang hanap buhay, then that could be considered as a technological crisis. On the other hand, when a crisis arises, when employees are indulged in violent acts, such as beating employees or superiors in the office premises itself, it is called crisis due to workplace violence. So may mga pagkakataon na nag-aaway, hindi lamang yung rumor mongering, hindi lamang yung mga tinatawag nating minor friction. So there are instances na mismo yung mga empleyado nagpapatayan o kaya empleyado pinatay niya yung kanyang manager. Okay? So we call that crisis due to workplace violence. So just like, say for example, what happened to one police colonel, a provincial director in Mindanao, na during the inspection doon sa checkpoint ay nagkaroon ng confrontation at binaril ng kanyang subordinate yung provincial director. So that is also an example of crisis due to workplace violence. What about crisis due to rumors? Diba? Yung mga tinatawag nating chismusa at mga chismoso. Spreading false rumors about the organization and brand lead to crisis. Meaning, may mga paninira or mga, kumbaga, haka-haka na sabi na ganito yan, ganito yung nangyayari dyan, ganito yung nangyayari rito. Okay? So, mga speculations lang yan. Now, maari na yan ay paniwalaan ng ibang tao. Pag pinaniwalaan yan ng mga ibang tao, ng mga customers, then basically, mag-focus yan ng crisis doon sa organization. Ang tawag natin dyan is crisis due to rumors. So employees must not spread anything which would tarnish the image of their organization. That's why to prevent this kind of crisis due to rumors among employees and among officials of an institution or company or organization is yung tinatawag natin na yung loyalty check na tinatawag natin. At the same time, yung tinatawag natin na dapat magkaroon ng satisfaction doon sa compensation ng mga employees. Okay, so we have seen the different types of crisis according to the nature. Now, there is what you call crisis intervention. Well, whether we like it or not, a critical event may impact an individual or the entire institution. So, maaring ang effect niyan psychologically, emotionally, or mentally ay maari na isang individual lamang yan or sa buong company yan. Ngayon, meron tayong tinatawag na crisis intervention. It is the process by which a mental health worker identifies, assesses, and intervenes with the individual in crisis so as to resolve or to restore balance and reduce the effects of the crisis in his or her life. That is, if we are referring to an individual crisis. Kasi, ang isang crisis, isang critical event, kapag yan ay hindi na-reduce yung impact niya, so maaring mag-cause yan ng mental abnormalities or psychological disturbances sa isang tao. So, sino man or anuman yung process para tinatawag natin ay tutulong upang ma-restore yung psychological and mental normalcy ng tao na yan, okay, or ma-reduce yung effect ng kanyang crisis sa kanyang buhay, then that is called crisis intervention. Now, if we are looking on the larger aspect of an organization, any group or individuals that will try now to help a company or an organization or institution okay, reduce the impact of the critical events in their company or organization, well, that's still what you call a crisis intervention. So what are the goals of crisis intervention? Well, first thing first is to identify, assess, and intervene. To identify what? Identify the cause of crisis, no? To identify the cause of the critical event. And then to assess, meaning to evaluate, no? Ano yung mga naging epekto nito sa isang individual or ano yung naging epekto nito sa buong company. Now, intervene meaning is magkaroon na ng, if that is an individual person, magkaroon ng counseling. Okay? If that is an organization, magkaroon ng tinatawag nating reorientation of the employees. Or magkaroon ng mga legal and technological advices upang masolusyonan yung crisis na nangyari sa isang company. Then of course, another goal of crisis intervention is to return the individual to his or her prior level of functioning as quickly as possible para makarecover siya kaagad. Bumalik siya sa normal niyang pamumuhay at pag-iisip. Okay? Dahil apektado siya doon sa crisis na nangyari sa kanyang pamilya or sa kanyang buhay or sa kanyang company. If in case of a company or an organization, the crisis intervention is to help, okay, the company to return to its normal operation. And finally, one of the goals of crisis intervention is to lessen any negative impact on future mental health of those people who are affected by the crisis. So somehow kasi pag nagkaroon ng critical event, minsan kapag mahina yung coping mechanism ng tao, maaaring magkokos yan ng psychological and mental imbalance or disorder. Okay? On the other hand, if we are talking about the company, then we might not be talking about the mental disturbances of the employees and the officials, then we might be talking on or referring to what you call the loss. Okay? That is the loss of the company or the government, the financial loss or whatever loss that is, okay, that is being incurred by the company because of a crisis. So the crisis intervention or the helper now is there to at least lessen any negative impact of that we call it crisis, okay, para doon sa kanilang mga future endeavors na tinatawag natin. Okay, so we have also the ABC model of crisis intervention by Dr. Christy Cannell. So I'm looking on the A, B, and C. I was thinking that that is an acronym, but according to Dr. Christy Cannell, the first stage or the A of a crisis intervention is that developing and maintaining a rapport. Meaning, if you are the crisis interventionist, you are the helper, at least you must be able to develop a rapport or a good communication. Say, for example, if you are trying to intervene, okay, or to help a person in crisis, okay, he is suffering from mental or psychological disturbances, then as a crisis interventionist, you must be able to develop that rapport or to maintain that rapport so that there will be what you call a trust. Okay? So makakabuild ka ng trust sa kanya, pagkakatiwalaan ka niya. Just like in a company, you are a professional crisis interventionist, dapat marunong ka. Okay? You have your attending skills, okay? You have your communication skills, okay? So dapat ay magkakaroon or mabuild up mo yung tiwala ng company sa'yo upang makikinig sila sa'yo na ikaw ay makakatulong doon sa kanilang present or doon sa kanilang critical experiences. The letter B, on the other hand, is that the crisis interventionist or the helper must be able to identify the nature of the crisis and altering cognitions or alter if we are talking about we call it a mental disturbance, because the ABC model of crisis intervention by Dr. Christy Cannell is more on the mental health actually. But again, the concept can also be applied on a company or any organization or any group who are suffering from a crisis. No? So, a crisis intervention must be able to identify the nature. Ano ba yung nag-cause ng crisis? Okay? At ano yung pwedeng baguhin? At ano yung nagpabago sa pananaw o nagpabago sa pag-iisip? Okay? So, ano na yung situation ng crisis na yan? Okay? If the person is suffering from mental crisis, ano na yung state ng kanyang mental disturbance? Kailangan na ba ng medical intervention? Kailangan na bang dalhin ito sa hospital? Like that, no? Same thing, if you are referring to a company, ano na ba yung state? Gaano na kalaki? Or gaano yung impact ng crisis nangyari sa kanila? Kailangan na ba ng other help for them? Okay? So, moving on further, the letter C of the ABC model of crisis intervention is coping, which includes resolution, referral, and support groups. So if we are talking about an individual suffering from mental disturbances because of a critical event in his or her life, so somehow, ano yung maaring gawin? Resolution, no? Ano yung maaring gawin para siya ay makapag-cope up? Okay? I-refer ba natin siya or kailangan ba niya ng support groups? Meaning, kailangan ba ng kanyang mga relatives or kaibigan na pwedeng makatulong sa kanya upang somehow ay makalma yung kanyang mental and psychological disturbance. So, magkakaroon ng tinatawag nating debriefing session. Pag sinabi nating debriefing, at least ay, kumbaga, they will try now to remove whatever we call its thoughts or mga maling isip niya. Okay? Or maling perception niya na yun ang nagkokos ng kanyang mental disturbance. Insofar as a company is concerned or an organization is concerned, the coping will now include on what should be done by the company. Okay? To resolve matters or para ma-recover kaagad yung mga nawala sa kanila. Kailangan ba na i-refer sa ibang mga tao o ibang mga expert or kailangan ba ng mga support organizations so that they will be able to recover doon sa kanilang loss as caused by the critical events. Okay? So, with that, let's close the discussion by again looking at the Bible on what does the Bible say about disasters. In Romans chapter 12, verse 12, the Apostle Paul said he was suffering during that time. Actually, he was in prison, and the Apostle Paul suffered so much pain. Okay, during his ministry, okay, to the Gentiles, actually to the Roman government or to the Roman people. And he said that rejoice in hope. Sabi niya, kahit anong hirap, there should be may dapat pag-asa. Sabi niya, isipin natin may pag-asa. Okay? Be patient in tribulation. Kailangan natin ng magtiis. And above all, sabi niya, be constant in prayer. That's why, whatever crisis that we are experiencing right now, okay, the only thing that we can do is we have to rejoice that there is hope, na merong pang araw, merong pang darating na bukas. Ika nga, ay habang may buhay, may pag-asa. And of course, to me, habang may Diyos, mayroong pag-asa. So be patient, matatapos din yan. Okay? And of course, huwag kalimutan to ask the help of the Lord. So Paul is telling us today, be constant in prayer. So with that, thank you very much once again for listening and watching. And again, do not forget to hit the subscribe button if you have not subscribed yet to the channel. And should you have any question, feel free to comment on the comment section.